Hello everybody and welcome back. Today's episode, D&D 2024 Combat Encounter Changes by yours truly. So, one of the first recommendations of combat encounters is to spice things up. Changes in elevation, defensive positions, hazards, mixed monster groups, and even reasons to move characters and monsters were all suggested by the new the new Dungeon Master's Guide. So for changes in elevations, terrain features that provide changes to elevations, such as stacks of empty crates, ledges, or balconies, reward clever positioning and encourage characters to climb, jump, fly, or teleport. Defensive positions. Enemies in hard-to-reach defensive locations or defensive positions force characters who would normally attack at range to move around. This could also be defensive positions such as hiding behind fully solid walls in narrow corridors, or just taking full cover areas so that they cannot be pelted range. Hazards. The hazards section, also in the Dungeon Master's Guide, describes dangerous features such as patches of green slime that characters or their enemies can be used to their advantage. We've also seen things like quicksand pits or even triggering traps in the midst of combat, such as arrow or spike traps. Mixed groups of enemies. While different enemy types of monsters work together, they can combine their abilities, just like a character with different classes and origins can. A diverse force is more powerful. This is very true, and this is even what I recommend for single monster encounters, and that is I kind of don't recommend it. Even the book will go into it later, where you give the single monster a lot of minions, so pretty much a huge ogre, and maybe it's a necromantic ogre, who summons little skeletons that they can attack at range for your ogre as a other threat to deal with. And finally, reasons to move. Use this feature to encourage characters and their enemies to move around, such as chandeliers, kegs, gunpowder, or oil, or a rolling stone trap. You can also set a turn limit on how long the fight can last, as if something terrible is about to happen in 30 seconds, so the characters have 5 rounds total. Or even shorter than that. So, there are new combat encounter difficulties. There is low difficulty, moderate difficulty, and high difficulty, replacing the old between trivial to deadly. So for low difficulty, an encounter with a low difficulty is likely to have 1 or 2 scary moments for the players, but the characters should emerge victorious, with no casualties. 1 or more of them might lead to the use of healing resources. However, a rough guideline: a single monster generally presents a low difficulty challenge rating for a party of 4 characters, whose level equals the monster's CR. Moderate difficulty, obsessant healing and other resources in an encounter of a moderate difficulty could go badly for adventurers. Weaker characters might get taken out of the fight, and there's a slim chance that 1 or more of the characters might die. High difficulty counter could be lethal for 1 or more characters. To survive it, characters will need smart tactics, quick thinking, and the ability with and a little bit of luck. Finally, I would like to add in the monster's challenge rating. As far as we've seen, it's the 15th of November, but right now, the monsters so far seem to have a higher difficulty when in tiers 2 and 4, which is about CR 5 and up, while in tier 1 they seem to be actually weaker, probably trying to avoid TPKs at that low level. So this is the amount of EXP that a single combat should have per player. This is only assuming 1 player at the moment, but you just multiply these numbers by how many players you have. Now, what we can first see here is these new low, moderate, and high encounters stack up to the old medium, the old hard, and the old deadly. So we have shifted trivial and easy have been taken off the board because they were too easy. It was not even worth having that combat encounter. So we're starting off with medium. Now, nothing changes in tier 1. From between levels of 1 to 4, you were fighting the same difficulties encounters. It's just that the bar has shifted over by 1. And finally, going forward, when there starts to be a gap between how pulled ahead the new combat XP budget is, it will use, if it's below 19%, it'll be like a little bit of a tinge. If it's above 20%, it'll be a lot of a tinge. And then finally, the one that goes above it by 40% will be in black. So in tier 2, this is where we start seeing a shift. With the moderate EXP, it starts to jump up by 100, and then 200, and that pattern continues, staying about 400 at the end at level 10 here. At low levels, at level 8, it starts to jump up by 100, and then 200, and a whopping 400, which even exceeds it to like 75, 25% more deadly than its original 10th level counterpart. Whoops. And then at high levels, the same thing at level 9, it starts jumping up from here, going to 200 jumps, 300 jumps. And this pattern continues where now it is permanently above the head, right out of the end part of tier 2 and into tier 3 and above. It's jumping for the low at about 400, even 500 to 600 here at the end here. It's 16th and 15th and 16th level. While moderate jumps ahead significantly. It's jumping up by 1,000 when it gets to 14th level. Now it stays at above 20% increase in difficulty. Yeah, that's... Jesus. That's like 13,000 right there at level 16. And then the same thing happens to the new high. It's beating out Deadly by 500 to start off with. And then it jumps to over 1,000 at 15th level. And then at 16th, it actually jumps by 2,400? Massive gaps here. Massive gap is now 20% harder for the moderate and high. And then for some reason it goes down in this one, 17th from the moderate, but it goes back up again to being... at level 20, the gap for low is a little bit less. It's only 700. But for the moderate encounters, that's... oh my gosh, it's almost a 5,000 gap. And then we get to the deadly, where it's already at 3,000 jumps, and then 4,000, and then 7,000, and finally the 10,000 jump, giving it 40% higher and more deadly than the old level 20 deadly encounter. Now remember, this is per player, so this multiplied by your players, that's like the types of dragon threats they should be facing. I think this is like CR 26 and above will get you about that number. But if they're a small group, they can be facing lesser dragons, or maybe multiple dragons, or other godlike titanic creatures, like giants, greater devils, or angels. But yeah, this is what the new high level is looking at like. Even there, like, even a low level encounter just beats out its moderate level difficulty from earlier on. Even the moderate difficulty is beating out the old deadlies at this rate. Anyways, so there used to be encounter multipliers. Well, there still is, but the new 2024 handbook reads: the more creatures in an encounter, the higher the risk that a lucky streak on their part could deal more damage to the characters than you expect. If your encounter includes more than 2 creatures per character, include fragile creatures that can be defeated quickly. These guidelines are especially important at levels 1 and 2. That I agree with full-heartedly. You don't want to overwhelm your early level players. I don't think the book follows this guideline necessarily. I mean, it kind of does, but I wouldn't run mob encounters for level 1 parties. Like, I would keep it dead even with the amount of characters they have, or less than. Whereas the old multiplier was simply this. If you have 1 monster, you multiply the EXP budget by 1. If you have 2 monsters, you multiply the EXP budget by 2.5. If you have 3 to 6 monsters, you double the EXP modifier budget. If you have 7 to 10 monsters, you multiply it by 2.5. If you have 11 to 14, multiply by 3. And if you have 15 plus, you multiply it by 4. It is also multiplied the EXP the players got as well. Then there is now short rests. Short resting is important, and this is what the new player's handbook say with it, but I agree with the old version a little bit more. While successive combats increase tension, taking a short rest relaxes tension somewhat, as the character has many chances to replenish some of their resources, and many adventures through the character. Oh, I need water again. In many adventures, though the characters and their players have a sense that they need to act quickly to deal with the situations presented by the adventurer, this creates tension between needed to rest and the sense that things are getting worse. While the characters are resting, you can influence the peace and tension of your adventure by determining where, and when the characters can rest. If the characters are exploring a vast dungeon, consider scattering a few small rooms with only one door, where the characters can bar the door and rest reasonably, expecting to spend an hour or even the night in safety. I wouldn't say give them a long rest unless it's a big dungeon, but definitely a short rest. As for the 2014, this is very simple. In general, over the course of a full adventuring day, the party should likely have 2 short rests, one of the third of the way through, and the other 2/3 of the way through. Nice and simple. This is also based off the design philosophy that they had in the old version of 6 combat encounters, so you got 2 short rests per 2 combat encounters. The game no longer runs like this, or even hadn't run like this in most tables. A lot of tables for shorter days, and the new DMP actually accounts for that. So, I will now be going over the adventure modules at the end of this section of the book. This technically will be spoilers, but I will only be looking at the monster's amount and their CR rating and how that equivocates to their challenge in the new version. In addition, I will then be following up with, if I add the multipliers from the multiple encounters here, and how that would consider those more difficult, and to basically show what it looks like. So here it is, the level 1 adventure, the level 2 adventure, the level 3 adventure, the level 5 adventure, and level 7 adventure. Now, the level 1 adventure will give you enough EXP for a party of 4 to level up. They're all based in parties of 4, I assume. So it'll give the whole party enough EXP where everyone can level up. Same thing happens with the second level adventure, with a little bit of a caveat here. But by the third adventure, it doesn't give you enough to level up, which would be fine. But there's a problem in the design philosophy of they start giving away free EXP for finishing the adventure. And I feel like you could just make some of the adventures a little bit harder to give the party that EXP bonus, but Because even everything in green right now is a trivial combat that's not even hard enough to be considered a low combat. So at level 1 they make enough adventure, at level 3 they don't, and then at level 5 they don't by a more significant portion. They make a lot of EXP here, but not enough to level them up. Especially for this one's a little bit more difficult. And then moving on to level 7, where level 7 is actually kind of the opposite, where it's just a little adventure where they barely make a quarter over what they're missing. They didn't even make a quarter, actually. Yeah, they're down. Oh, that's a quarter, I think. Whatever. No, it's not a quarter. So they barely make a quarter of what they need to get to level 8. But anyways, this is why I prefer milestones as a DM. So, the first encounter at level 1 the player characters face is 6 CR8 creatures for a total of 150 XP. Then they face 4 CR quarter creatures for a total of 200. Then they have an optional fight of a CR1 creature for 200. Then they have the boss fight, which is 1 CR half creature with their 6 CR 8th creatures and minions, which is 250 XP. And then each player gets a bonus 100 EXP for finishing the mission, and that'll bring them up to 300 EXP, which is a level up. The same thing happens at... Oh, sorry, I forgot to explain. These blue lines are short rest, while the red ones are long rests in the adventure. So we see 2 short rests for the first adventure that the player characters can take. Same thing here for the second level adventure. Make sure after 2 fights, these fights are actually random for the boss fight at the end. So I would say after 2 fights, you can easily give the player characters a short rest in the next room. And then the same thing after 2 more fights. So the same kind of formula here. You can see what the... Oops, you can see the CRs and how much XP the player character is going to get. They're going to be color-coded in how difficult it is. So these were lower level encounters. That was trivial, not even hitting the level minimum. Finally, we have a trap here, which it's a pretty deadly trap, especially for level 2 characters. So I suggest also giving the players enough EXP right here, depending on which ending they choose with the boss. They have another optional way to gain EXP, and that actually gains them a lot more than the boss fight would. So I recommend giving them EXP for finishing that trap based upon which they chose, just to get them shy of 240,000 EXP, or 600 for the whole party, leveling them up from level 2 to level 3. At level 3, we have a combat encounter, and then an optional combat encounter with 16 CR quarter creatures, which is it's a big jump. And then a trivial, and then a short rest, and then trivial combat, and then a single monster boss fight. And then bonus EXP for completing the mission. The level 5 adventures, it was a little bit more tricky to calculate, even with the short rest. The short rest is interesting, I'll get to it. These are a days long journey. Oops, I am again. This is a days long journey. They have one pretty nice tough fight before getting a long rest, and then they have optional fights that they have about a 15% chance to get. On the high end, there is a single CR8 creature. On the low end, there's 3 CR2 creatures. And there's a big EXP gap between the two, where one is trivial and the other one is a nice moderate encounter, even harder than the first one they could have faced. Next, when they finally get to the location they need to get to, they face off against 2 CR5 creatures and a trap. I didn't add the trap to the EXP, just the 2 CR5 creatures. But they might be strong enough to tough this one out and try to move on to the next fight, so they might not even take a short rest. where they face 6 CR3 creatures. And the problem there is that this fight is going to kick their butt a little bit, and they're going to want to rest, but they can't because immediately after that is the boss fight with a single CR8 creature. They get 4,000 XP total, so 1,000 each. But we'll make them a little bit shy of level 6. Which is fair, but my goodness, this final gauntlet here might actually kill a player, so they might need to make sure they have revivification crystals on them. Diamonds, sorry. And then finally, the interesting thing is level 7 encounter is actually a little, mostly an RP encounter. There's a single fight that makes up of a couple of creatures that all rounds up to 350. So no, it's not trivial. It's a lone fight, but it's not trivial. And then they get a bonus 6,800, which is I think 1,600 per person. That number seems right. Yeah, 1,600. But it's clearly about a quarter of what you need to move on. But the later stages of D&D should be made of a lot more about these adventures where stakes could be a little bit lower, and then you pick things off with the actual adventure of that level. So now we're going to multiply it by the old multipliers and see what that rating's difficulty would apply to the new one. So right off the bat, a lot of the low encounters are literally just the single monsters, the only ones that exist. Where this is the optional 1 CR and the 2 CR right here. So I've adjusted the EXP budget accordingly, and now we could see you get a lot more gains at the level 5 encounter, which I thought, again, is pretty hard. It's not, none of this is, the only one that's probably optional is if you get lucky with the random encounters, but I think you're bound to have like at least one of them. But I chose the temporal one. But you will level up to level 6 off of this one adventure using the old multiplier system. Finally, 2 deadly encounters, or beyond hard encounters, have appeared, where these are TPK worthy encounters, and that is the optional 16 of CR half at level 3. And I could definitely see that encounter if the players decide to take it, that could kill them. Or the 6 CR3 creatures at level 5, where I definitely would see the possibility of the player characters dying and then wanting to take a short rest and then just dying on the boss, because it's immediately after. So there are some harder encounters here at level 1 as well. I don't think it's truly reflecting, like, this is some of the problems in the old system is where I don't think it would be that bad, but this is 7 total attacks versus a party of 4. So it might be that tough for them. They might get overwhelmed by the amount of creatures there, but the CR8 creatures are fairly weak. It's actually even bumped up the single encounter in this day, but it's a single encounter, so that's not going to kill your players. Alright, I'll leave this sheet up for another 5 seconds while I take a drink. So, what does all this mean? Here are my suggestions. Now, in this modern era of D&D, I would suggest 4 on the normal side of combats per day to 5 if you want something extra. I still recommend 2 short rests per day. I think the book still recommends that, even though it doesn't outright say it. I think you should take the first short rest after 2 combats and have their second short rest be before the last combat of the day. If we're splitting it into 4s, it'll be 2, 1, 1. If we're splitting into 5s, it'll be 2, 2, 1. Now, for single monster encounters, if it lacks the multiple reactions, which is legendary actions in 2024, I would use weaker monsters to buffer them out, or to help them out in case they get heavily crowd controlled. At tier 1, I would stick to low combat challenges, with some moderate sprinkled in between. I would only use hard combat challenges for boss fights significant enough to you're okay with a player character dying here, because that is a good chance of that coming to fruition. At tier 2, I recommend using moderate combats with some low combats and about a single hard combat for a boss fight near the end of that adventuring day. Because at this rate, even if they do die during that hard combat, they have the ability to revive them at tier 2. At tier 3, I would use a mix of both moderate and hard combats towards the end of the day. I don't even think I would touch low combats at this rate, given the amount of power that these characters have. Even though it's scaling, I just don't think it's scaling enough. And then finally, at tier 4, I would only recommend hard combats. You could mix it up a bit, but I just feel like at this tier play, your characters are on top of the world, so you can send the world at them. So in conclusion, combat is harder. While player characters got buffed, so did the monsters, and the XP budget per combat is way higher now. I think this will make combat seem less easy in tiers 2 and beyond, while making tier 1 not have as many TPKs. So if you like this video, please give me a like, subscription, or if you have any thoughts and opinions, leave them in the comments below. Have a good one.